So ladies and gentlemen, we are back here at the NRB 2025. I have as a special guest today, John Strand. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Laurie. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Absolutely. So all of our supporters have been following what happened with COVID, the crisis that happened, people's rights being taken away. And you know, our mission at PJTN is to try to educate Christians to stand with Israel and the Jewish people against anti-Semitism, because if God said in the Bible that he'd waged war against Amalek from generation to generation, and if the Holocaust could happen in a Christian, Judeo-Christian nation, could it happen in the United States of America? And then we saw COVID happen. And John, you experienced it. I was there. I was in DC on January 6th. I didn't go into the Capitol. I was at the Ellipse. It was too cold. I said, I'm going back to my hotel.
Yeah, that worked out in your favor, as it turns out.
It did, as God would have it. But you had a far different outcome of what happened. And I wanted to have you on our show today to talk about your experience as a warning.
Yes.
That the signs were all there in how you were treated and others were treated on January 6th. And now we're just beginning. We haven't even heard the half of what has transpired, but you have an amazing story to tell.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Laurie. The story is really wild, but it does have its roots in similar issues that trace back to the event that your ministry is focused on. And I was really excited to speak with you just based on your fundamental priority of pursuing justice and proclaiming justice to the nations. And of course, God is explicitly clear. You can't miss this if you take the Bible seriously. The Israelites, the Jewish people, are God's chosen people that he formed and commissioned to share himself as one God of all the nations to the rest of the nations. So as Christians, and I myself am a Christian, understand that we are all God's chosen people that he's purchased with the blood of his son. So justice is such an incredibly important concept to God, and it's so near and dear to my heart. It always has been. But when I was a very young child, the tragedy and the frustration of seeing people mistreated was something that just bothered me at a soul level. And thank God I was raised in a Judeo-Christian household with very strong biblical roots and teachings, so that I understood these truths from a biblical perspective, from a historical perspective, and from a cultural application standpoint, such that when COVID happened, and as you said, we've all been paying attention to that because you could not otherwise, it's inescapable, it really disrupted our whole world, as it was designed to do. But because I had that biblical lens, the Judeo-Christian foundation of understanding there is an objective right and wrong, and we are called by God, no matter what our ancestry is, no matter what our religious affiliation is, we are called by God to stand for what is right and stand against what is wrong and what is evil. And justice is the pursuit of rectifying things that have gone wrong. So the pursuit of justice was always so important to me, and that's what really drove me to make some major changes in my own life when COVID happened, in the sense of the lockdowns. Now, my story is pretty unusual in some senses. I'm now known in various ways for my job as the creative director for America's Frontline Doctors, which is a nonprofit civil liberties organization, and the creative director at goldcare.com, which is a medical freedom platform. But my genesis as a young man in America was pursuing my American dream in the arts and in the entertainment field. So I started out as a musician. I was a lead singer and keyboardist for an indie rock band, and then started working as a fashion model and an actor in Hollywood and New York. And I was pursuing that career with a lot of passion for over a decade when COVID hit. And I felt God call me in my spirit at that time that I needed to step to the front lines of the cultural space to stand against what was evil at that time, which was simply the government trying to say, you're not allowed to go to work, you're not allowed to go to school, you're not allowed to worship. I mean, basic fundamental things that made it very clear to me, this wasn't about a flu, this was about totalitarian control and the government conditioning citizens to be compliant with the government if and when they chose to dictate how and when and where you might be able to worship or work or take care of your family. And I just felt God calling me to step out against that. And so that's what I did. That's how I came to become involved with Frontline Doctors in Gold Care. And that's how I came to find myself in Washington, D.C., like yourself, on January 6th. I was there in my professional capacity doing my job that day. And the rest is history from that standpoint.
Tell us what happened, because that was unfortunately a tragic day for so many people. So many paid, they were put in prison. You spent some time.
Yeah.
What happened that day? Retell the story
Yeah.
of your personal experience and the penalty, the price you had to pay to stand up for justice.
Right. So, like I said, I was working. I was in DC as part of my job. My colleague was scheduled to speak there at a rally with a government-approved permit alongside of numerous Congress people. So, from a personal standpoint, that's how I came to be there and get involved in what became a national issue. But, what's interesting, your organization championing the support of Israel and your comments at the beginning, which will, of course, we'll close that loop on what was the parallel to what happened in Nazi Germany. Why would we even reference Nazi Germany when talking about January 6th, right? Of course, people are going to say that's disrespectful, absurd,
Right.
etc.
I think so. Yeah.
But I saw what was happening and I experienced what was done to American citizens. And it's nothing short of absolutely horrific and shocking. What were done to 1,500 plus largely nonviolent and innocent American citizens that were hapless bystanders, really. And what I tell people about January 6th is it really is our American Reichstag fire moment. That's what January 6th was. So if you know your history in terms of what happened in Nazi Germany over a period of time, the Holocaust did not happen overnight, right? That was a process. There was a plan. There were strategies and demonic forces at play throughout people and government institutions that caused, like you said, a nation in Germany that was a Judeo-Christian based nation,
Right.
educated and wealthy, and yet allowed over a period of time a segment of their own citizenry to be categorized and then castigated and then demonized and then eradicated. So that there's a progression that was going on there. But that Reichstag fire moment was early on when the government and the players in government that had these intentions and these demonic intentions and nefarious plans to leverage positions and institutions of power and influence to accomplish their objective at the expense of certain kinds of people.
Right.
And so that's what we saw starting to happen with the fallout from January 6th. We knew early on when January 6th happened that there were very concerning indications of government involvement and even government entrapment. And over the ensuing 4 years, those evidences have continued to materialize and grow, somewhat culminating, although it's still an ongoing battle in many ways, but somewhat culminating with the bombshell Inspector General report. This was from the previous Biden administration's Inspector General that released this report saying, oh yeah, actually it turns out the FBI had undercover operatives involved on the ground. It's really a disturbing progression of what happened. But I was caught up in that meat grinder at the beginning. I was violently raided by an FBI SWAT team suited for a drug cartel
My God.
assault. This is at a condo in downtown Beverly Hills, where later I saw the evidence at trial of the FBI surveilling me for 7 days in advance, hiding in the bushes, surveillance camera style, tracking me
Oh,
a week in advance.
gosh.
Meanwhile, obviously, they knew who I was, where I lived. I'm also I was an actor in Hollywood. Like, people know how to get in touch with me. Certainly law enforcement knows how to get in touch with me if they need to. And I was there on January 6th. I made no secret of that. So why did they not call me and say the FBI needs to question you about whatever happened? I obviously would have said,
Intimidation.
yeah. So surveilled me for a week, pulverized my front door with a battering ram and 20 agents with machine guns in a assault that looked like something out of a demented Jason Bourne movie. And I just say that so you can sort of picture yourself in that moment. But there was nothing funny or humorous about it. It was
You were
abject
scared to
terror.
death.
Yeah, it was designed to terrorize people. Also, misapplied FBI assaults like that can cause innocent and unnecessary deaths easily. So it's no small thing. But the trauma, the devastation, the terrorizing of American citizens, and this happened to me, but it happened to hundreds and hundreds of nonviolent, peaceful American families, often with children at home on purpose. So it was a very Gestapo-esque type tactic that they were utilizing with these raids and with many other things that the government did to target and persecute citizens throughout 4 years of this war, or as I call it, a jihad against a certain segment of American citizens. I started saying the DOJ stands for the Department of Jihad. And people didn't quite get it at first, but it's a holy war. It was a holy war against really the base of American citizens that were willing to stand up behind the populist movement that President Trump and the MAGA agenda was advocating for, which of course is a return to Judeo-Christian principles. Fundamentally, that's what undergirds the MAGA movement, one nation under God, that we should actually acknowledge and commit to that.
Absolutely.
And so there was a holy war aspect of the weaponized government targeting those who were willing to stand for those principles, particularly the group that showed up in Washington, D.C. on a freezing cold day on January 6, 2021, and who were then, of course, swept into a Reichstag fire type entrapment event for a weaponized government to exploit them, frame them, demonize them, persecute and destroy them, but also send a reverberating message throughout the nation that you better not even think about contradicting the government's message and narrative.
It's interesting that you bring this up because when I was there in DC, we were all at the Ellipse listening to President Trump. And it was so cold that several of us, and we drove up. We had a group that drove in from Franklin, Tennessee, and then we drove up from Orlando. We went back to the hotel, turned on the TV, was watching Pence in the well, talking about that we were just taken over by a mob of MAGA people. And I started watching, the girls all started coming back to the hotel because they didn't want to walk down to the Capitol. And I said to them in my spirit, I knew we needed to get out of town. They were going to try to go after all these Trump supporters. They're going to lock this town down. So I told all the girls, go back to your room. We were going to stay one more night. I said, go back to your room, pack your bags. We're getting out of this city now before they lock it down. That was immediately my response, because I have all the history of watching and studying about the Holocaust and what happened and the tactics they use, what's the MO, and I could just see it playing out. They're going to blame all these people who came in. We didn't even know the half of the story.
No.
So continue telling me.
But you had the instincts, right?
Absolutely.
And you had the spiritual discernment and the historical understanding and backdrop that enlightened you quickly to the potential
Risk,
the potential
threat.
Problems that could, and then they became worse than we could have even imagined. I mean, just if I try to rewind my brain back to 2021 and think I'm a citizen of the United States of America and this is what I'm about to walk
You're being
into.
subjected to.
Yes. It's almost impossible to have believed, yet I've now walked through it for 4 years now. 12 days after January 6th, raided by the FBI, I was disappeared for 4 straight days without a phone call or any word to my family. No one knew where I was for 4 days. My colleague had to hire a private investigator to track me down and then pressure the government to get me bonded out. That was just the start of this process. I mean, very Soviet-style tactic there, and immediate abridgment of civil rights that are shocking on their face, just in the first week out of the gate. this has been 4 years of the government just doing willy-nilly whatever they want to weaponize bureaucratic processes and weaponize agencies like the FBI and SWAT teams. It has been nothing short of a war against a segment of American citizens. And so the Department of Jihad is a moniker they've really earned in that sense. So when I got out, bonded out, went to the arraignment and figured out what the heck just happened to me and to the country. And it started to put the pieces together to realize, oh, I see where this is going. I made a determination early on that the Biden regime, as it was operating at that time, was really committed to going to war in this sense. And I made a decision that I was not going to shrink from that battle.
Right.
So I was presented pretty early with what I was facing, 5 charges, including a 20-year felony. I was facing a total of 23 years of potential prison, $500,000 in fines, and essentially the rest of my life destroyed for all practical intents and purposes. But then I was given what I call a golden parachute plea deal. And this is a pretty unusual circumstance in the J6 story. I'm not really aware of too many others that had 20-year felony, 23 years of prison, but a single misdemeanor plea deal, which they did not accept. There are a handful of folks that did go to trial, but I think most of the time their plea still included felonies and a lot of years of prison. But my plea was a single misdemeanor. It's a slap on the wrist, and it would have been done behind me several years ago.
Right.
And I knew in that moment that I had a very unique and powerful opportunity to do something that God calls all of us to do, but doesn't necessarily put all of us in a particular situation where it would cost so much and hurt so much to do it.
Right.
But regardless of the pain, it was a very clear black and white choice between standing up for what was right and fighting for good and standing up against evil, even at the cost of my own life to a certain degree.
Thank you.
So I was deeply committed to making the right choice in that moment. And I wasn't unaware that it was going to be very awful, but I was just so aware, especially given the context of what we had gone through with COVID and understanding, all of these influences throughout history, kind of bringing us to this point, having seen the implementation of balkanization, or those fracturing of segments of society that we saw happen in Nazi Germany, that we've seen happen in totalitarian regimes of every stripe, and that we were seeing the Biden administration deploy and utilize in various ways, and then crystallized in this January 6th moment. So I knew it was my opportunity to stand against that, and I had to do it. It was, people ask me, how did you make the decision to refuse that plea? And have you ever regretted doing so? And honestly, Lauren, I tell people that it was the most painful decision I've ever made in my life, but it was the crystal clearest, simplest decision ultimately that I've never had a doubt about, never wavered, never regretted for a second. And it put me through living hell on earth in ways that I wrote a book in prison to describe all the details of what I went through. It's called Patriot Plea. You can pre-order it at johnstrand.com. And I hope you'll pick up that book, not only for yourself, but to share it with other patriots, other Christians, and even Americans who are not Christian, but do understand the incredible value of a nation that is built on principles that inherently protect the dignity and sanctity of every human life. And that was what was at stake. That's what drove me to refuse that plea, knowing I'd go to prison for it. And those are the principles that continue to inspire me and to empower me to, take the story God's given me to this point and continue to march forward, with a real mission and a mandate to share that story with people.
Right.
And inspire them to understand how they can exercise what I call uncomfortable courage. Now is the time for us to all commit to doing that. For you and for the audience, I pray it does not involve going to prison for years and being tormented in isolation and these other insane things that I've gone through. But everyone is going to have opportunities and moments where doing the right thing is going to be uncomfortable. And the calculation we make, we're always making those calculations. I mean, we're just built that way biologically, as well as there's a spiritual component to understanding how we make decisions. And I'm not saying you should always do the most painful thing. There's wisdom we need to have as well. But there's such a slippery slope towards choosing comfort and convenience that then causes us to self-censor and self-limit. And before you know it, we've inadvertently led ourselves into a pattern of ultimately cowardice. Right? And we don't necessarily mean to do that, but nonetheless, God judges us by our fruits. He judges us by our actions. And the judgment for cowardice in Scripture is
not good.
It's not good.
It's like using the story of the 10 spies when God told
Joshua
Moses to send the 12 spies into the land, spy it out. Is it good? Is there fruit? Are there people there? Can you take them? And 10 of them came back.
Such a great story.
With a negative report.
Right.
And because of that, the two who said, we got this, Joshua and Caleb, they ended up having to suffer because the rest of the 10 spies, they had to share their fate, and they wandered for 40 years in the desert. Yes, God hates cowardice, because if we're cowards, we're not trusting God. It takes great faith to trust that God, when he puts us in circumstances that may be challenging and challenging us in ways we never thought that we could be challenged, but always in the midst of that challenge, knowing that God was in control, that this didn't catch him, whatever circumstance that we find ourselves in, doesn't catch him by surprise.
It's such a great analogy. In my book, I share the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is so powerful. They had just a fundamental understanding of right and wrong. God called them to worship God only and not to bow to any statue. So when a king at the time put that in front of them, they said, we don't mean any insult, and we don't even know if God will spare our life. But it doesn't matter. We know what we've been called to do, and we're going to do it, come what may. Throw us into the hottest fire you can. And that really inspired me. Your story is also great. Joshua and Caleb, they saw the same giants in the land that the other 10 spies saw. And they could have given into that fear because those giants were real. Those fears were real. But they reported to Moses and said, be courageous, we can do it because God is behind us, because God has called us, because God has empowered us, and he will overcome these giants. So I was pretty alone in 2021, raided by the FBI, terrorized by a weaponized government, and the whole country, everyone in my life and in my team, everyone told me to take the plea deal.
Take the plea deal.
All of them.
Yeah. Take the easy way.
Yeah. And
isn't that how we are conditioned, though, as a country? Take the path of least resistance.
Yes. And so I refused that plea, number one, because it was a flat out lie. And so I was not going to bear false witness as a Christian, as a strictly 10 Commandments biblical matter. Yeah. It was crystal clear on that point alone. And that point was everything to me. But in addition, I felt so passionate, and I felt very commanded by God in that moment to understand the bigger picture, that this lie was not only a lie against myself, it was a series of lies and machinations that the enemy was constructing, driven by Satan, but actually employed by corrupt elements of the government to construct a series of lies that would devastate 1,500 plus people and their families and send a chilling message throughout our entire nation. And this is where we get back to that Nazi Germany parallel, where I was seeing the progression that started. And if it was to continue, who knows where it would go? But we've seen where this goes, and it's genocidal if you are silent for long enough. So I was not going to be silent. I was not going to participate in those lies. And I knew that God had given me the opportunity to emulate Joshua and Caleb, to say, God has called us into the land of giants, but he will give us victory. So I was definitely going up against a Goliath
good.
known as the department, the DOJ. And no one expected me to be able to win. I don't even know if I'm going to say I expected to win in the way that I did. I expected that God was faithful, that he would slay the necessary giants, and that he had a mission and a purpose for me, that he would deliver me. But like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, maybe I would not be spared myself. But that's not my department. That's not my judgment call. That's for God to decide.
Right. He knows the days. He knows the hairs on our head,
Yes.
and he knows the days. They're all numbered.
But wow, Laurie, the end of the story, I mean, the story's not over, but the end of this chapter is that I did go to prison and I suffered tremendously, and I share those details in the book. But I didn't take the plea. I pled not guilty and had an appeal. And I was accepted, bypassing the also corrupt appellate courts, and went straight to the Supreme Court. My attorney told me that's like shooting the moon. It is so historically rare to get granted a review by the Supreme Court, bypassing the other intermediary levels. It is so rare. And it's even more rare that you win. I won at the Supreme Court. I was vindicated.
Wow.
And at the beginning of this year, the DOJ vacated all charges against me, and I am completely exonerated legally. Even pre-pardon, I didn't even have to technically accept a pardon.
Right. So where are we now? I mean, we've got a new administration. Is President Trump, have you heard, is President Trump going to cause his DOJ to investigate itself after what happened?
He absolutely needs to. I do believe he's going to do that. I think there's no greater evidence than appointing Kash Patel and Dan Bongino to the top of that storied and now incredibly corrupt organization. I am ecstatic to see that. And I will continue to advocate fiercely for what needs to be done. I'm actually helping to lead a grassroots organization, or really just we call it a strategic alliance. It's just a First Amendment assembly.
Right.
But it's called We Are J6. And the entire country, we urge you to support that simply by participating. We're not asking for money or anything. We're just saying we need everyone to be aware of what's happening and to help us share the truth, dismantle the false narrative that was toxic, destructive, demonic, Marxist, all of the above. But wearej6.com. You can register as a J6er if you are one, and you can register as an advocate just for the general public to help this mission. We want to deliver restorative justice. Now that means specifically victim recovery.
Right.
These people, many of them are totally destitute. It's shameful. It would horrify you if you could know the details of these stories. We're going to help these people tell their own stories because they deserve to be heard. They need that. And the country needs to know the truth as well. So we're going to help share the truth about that and build up the public recognition and demand for restitution for these people, and also a real national reckoning with what happened, because it will happen again if we don't understand the truth.
And I think God is giving us this reprieve, this opportunity, because we could face this again another day. There's no, after Trump, I keep telling people, we've got 4 years to work while we can to make as many changes as we possibly can to our government, to our local government, to our state government.
Yes.
Because
all the
we
above.
don't know what's going to happen. And this was a test run. And the people that were behind it are still out there, and they haven't been brought to justice.
Right.
God willing, they will under this administration. But if not, there may come another time. This is such an amazing story. Tell our audience again, John, how can they get your book? How can they find you to follow the work that you're doing? This is just amazing, and it's so inspiring.
Oh, I'm so honored to hear that. I'm really excited that it's making an impact, and I'm blessed and encouraged and so committed to staying the course. Like Paul says, run the race such that you may win, right? So I'm just starting out on this course. Our country is just getting back to the battlefield at this moment. This new Trump administration and this new turn of events, this new turning point in our national storyline is absolutely, completely historic. it is not only once in a lifetime, it's once in a millennium. I really believe that. And so please definitely follow my story if you're not familiar with it at johnstrand.com, JOHNSTRAND, johnstrand.com. You can pre-order the book Patriot Plea. You can follow me on social media, particularly X, Twitter, free speech platform where the real substantive political conversations are happening. And the book Patriot Plea, I called it that, of course, because I refused that fraudulent plea deal.
Yes.
But it's a play on words. I'm making a plea to the country to re-examine what it means to be a patriot and recommit ourselves to being American citizens. We have really lost touch with what it actually means to be a citizen.
Yes.
It is not free. It has a cost and an obligation, and we will lose the benefit and the privilege of our citizenship if we don't understand and engage authentically with the commitment, duties, and obligations of being an American citizen.
Absolutely.
And that involves a lot, but that starting point of that conversation and kind of igniting that resurgence of patriotism is something this is our chance to do it.
That's right. We have to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. What an inspiring story. It encouraged me. Being on the front lines fighting this battle of anti-Semitism is not easy, but standing up and doing the right thing is. Even if it costs you everything, what you may think may be everything, but God has another plan for you and for your life. So, John, he obviously had a plan for yours. You're amazing. God bless you. Thank you so much
Thank you so much.
for being
God
on the
bless
show
you guys.
today.
It was my honor. Thank you.